Welcome to my intermediate guide for survivors. My name is Keslius, and I'm a survivor main with over 500 hours in Dead by Daylight. This video assumes that you've already watched my beginner's guide, or played for 50 to 100 hours so you have a good foundation. This video also assumes that you already leveled multiple survivors to Prestige 3, specifically Dwight, Meg, and Fung. If not, go watch my beginner's guide and level up your characters, then come back. Finally, there are chapters in the description, so if there's a particular area you're struggling with, you can jump straight there. Alright, let's get into it. If you've already seen my beginner's guide, you know what survivors I recommend for newer players and which perks I generally like. However, this video is not for beginners. I'm going to say this next part loudly because it's something a lot of my solo queue teammates don't understand. You need to be able to play aggressively and stay alive in chase. Part of this is just practice, but what build you bring is even more important. For perks, run Deja Vu, Bond, Lithe, and Adrenaline. Bring a medkit. The rarity and add-ons aren't super important. What matters is having a medkit to heal yourself in a pinch or a teammate if they're being tunneled. If you have blood point offerings, bring those as well. If not, bring a hatch offering so you know where the hatch will spawn. Now this is not the strongest build in the game, but it is one of the most versatile. Deja Vu helps complete objectives. Bond essentially tells you where every member of your team is. Lithe helps you stay alive in chase and make distance against the killer, and Adrenaline can save your life in the endgame. If you'd prefer to run perks like Windows of Opportunity, Deliverance, Unbreakable, or Decisive Strike instead of Adrenaline, that's fine. But the information from Bond and Deja Vu is essential for newer players. You could also run Sprint Burst instead of Lithe, but Lithe is the easiest exhaustion perk to use, so I recommend avoiding Sprint Burst until you feel more comfortable in chase, or have perks like Vigil or Fixated to make Sprint Burst even stronger. I'll cover exhaustion perks and looping advice later on, but the important takeaway here is to always bring a full build with an item for every game. Items like brown medkits are so cheap in the Blood Whip you can bring one every game and basically never run out. When you spawn into a match, you should note the locations of all visible generators, exit gates, and teammates, before immediately splitting up. If you bring the offering to spawn far away from other survivors, you don't need to split up and start working on generators earlier. In the early game, it is vitally important that survivors work on different generators, so no matter who the killer chases, there will still be generator progress. As a general rule, working on different objectives is best because it maximizes your team's efficiency. While working on a generator quickly is important, making sure it's the correct generator to work on is more important. In solo queue, the burden falls on you to break any 3-gens and loop the killer for as long as you can. In a Swift, you can elect 1 or 2 people as your designated loopers, with exhaustion or second chance perks, while the others bring perks and items to help with gen speed, healing speed, and spreading out hook stages. I will continue this video assuming you're playing solo, but if you're in a Swift, everything I say that you need to think about is stuff you should be communicating to your team. First, you cannot let the killer keep a good 3-gen. Breaking up a strong 3-gen is worth letting a teammate get tunneled, because if you don't break it up, you'll likely lose no matter what. The strength of a 3-gen is entirely dependent on how close the generators are to one another. Deja Vu is the most useful perk for solo queue, because when you spawn, you will know the layout of the strongest 3-gen in the map. If you spawn in and the outline generators aren't very close together, the killer got unlucky, and you can relax slightly. If, however, those 3 generators are almost touching, you must go repair them first. Killers can see all the generators on a map, but that much information can be overwhelming, so a survivor running Deja Vu can break a 3-gen before most killers notice. However, good killers will notice 3-gens early, and some will spend the entire game protecting those 3 generators alone and ignoring the rest. In these scenarios, you must work as a team to break the 3-gen by playing aggressively and pressuring 2 of the 3 generators at the same time. The killer cannot be in 2 places at once, so forcing them to come hit you and kick your generator can give your teammates time to complete the other. The order in which the generators are completed is also very important. Every time a Deja Vu generator is repaired, the game will check to see which are the next 3 closest and highlight them. By focusing too much on the highlighted generators and not the overall layout across the map, survivors can accidentally break one 3-gen only to create a stronger one. While technically the first one highlighted is always the closest by distance, that doesn't take into consideration walls, pallets, or elevation. Generators out in the open are always easier for killers to patrol than ones behind walls or inside buildings. In most scenarios, the first deja vu generator you need to repair is the middle one. By completing the middle gen, the 3 gen that was highlighted will be broken up. Most of the time this is smart. However, you shouldn't complete the middle gen first if you notice there's a generator close to one of the outer deja vu gens. In that scenario, complete that outer gen first to not open the door for a second 3 gen in the endgame. The logic of generator order is to break the 3 gen first, then complete a generator in the middle of the map or across the map from the first one you completed, depending on the layout of your map. You basically want the first 2 gens you pop to be on opposite sides of the map, and ideally breaking up 2 separate 3 gens. The third generator to repair is often the one most centrally located or in the main building, again, depending on the map and RNG. On small maps like Lampkin Lane or Midwich Elementary School, the generators in the middle are more important than the rest because the killer can easily guard multiple generators from one position. If done correctly, the last 4 generators to repair will be along the outer walls in opposite corners of the map. Then, the 4th generator to complete is whichever of those is least safe. In other words, the most visually exposed, fewest pallets nearby, or closest to another generator. Again, if done correctly, this should make it easy to complete the last gen and try to escape. There are a couple important outlier scenarios for generator order that I'll cover before moving on. The first, certain killers can use their power to protect certain generators. Think Trapper, Singularity, Hag, etc. If you see an opportunity to complete a generator that the killer is trying to protect, take it, even if this generator is not in the strongest position. By messing up the killer's plan, you've wasted their time, and it will likely take a few seconds for them to move their traps and reset, and hopefully by then, another generator will pop. Another important consideration is where the survivor's safest area is. If there's a certain area with more pallets, tiles, boons, or simply obstacles for the killer, it's a good idea to work on this generator early, but not complete it until later in the game. This might be confusing, but let me explain. Often killers will remember which generators the survivors have been working on. So, if you can lure them to this safe area and then take them on a long chase, they'll waste time, your teammates can complete more important generators, and sometimes the killer will just give up and let you pop that gen anyways. When the endgame is approaching though, it's important that you can use these safe areas to loop without sandbagging a gen, so completing these safe generators, 3rd or 4th, is ideal. The final consideration is with the map layout. If there's a generator right next to an exit gate, right above the basement, or near a killer's hex totem, it can be a good idea to complete these earlier as well. Any situation where a killer can essentially protect 2 things from one position is too strong to leave for the endgame, but not often so strong they should be completed first either. If the killer doesn't have any hooks or injuries yet, focusing on cleansing any hex totems and breaking 3 gens is more important. The heart of looping as a survivor is your exhaustion perk. The main ones are Sprint Burst, Lithe, Dramaturgy, and Balanced Landing. These perks are called Exhaustion Perks because they cause the exhausted status effect upon activation, and provide speed bursts that can help you avoid the killer. All of the perks I just mentioned can be used mid-chase against a killer, but the one you should be using is Lithe. I like to think of Lithe as a button you can press to either add 20 seconds to a chase or escape the chase altogether. It's super simple to use and requires very little planning. By performing a quick vault, you gain a 50% haste effect for 3 seconds. In other words, hold, sprint, and vault equals move super fucking fast. If you keep an eye out for vaults as you move around the map, you won't even need windows to consistently get value. Normally, I'll work on a gen near a vault, so if the killer comes, I can make distance fast and find a tile I'm more comfortable with. A couple of notes on Lithe before I move on. First, you can vault without activating it by slow vaulting. As you move around the map, all you have to do is let go of the sprint button right before you vault, and you won't waste your Lithe. Second, never use Lithe on a second story vault. If you fall after vaulting, you eat up most of those 3 seconds with the falling animation. Lithe is strongest when used in flat, open areas to make distance between tiles. The final thing I'll say about exhaustion perks is how to manage the exhausted status effect. The exhaustion meter only goes down when you are not sprinting. If you just used Lithe to make distance, it's important to keep sprinting until you make it to a safer area. Once you do, you can incorporate walking in the loop. If you're waiting for a killer to catch up, letting go of the sprint button allows the exhaustion meter to go down. You can use this in a loop anytime you're looking at the killer. If you can see the killer and are safely on the other side of an obstacle, walk instead of sprinting. If the killer starts moving towards you, sprint. If they double back, walk, and then sprint when they get close. This is a much more advanced tip, but if you use this strategy with a perk like Vigil, you will get Lithe back multiple times in one chase. Okay, now that you understand what perks to run and how to use them, you need to understand how to loop. The absolute most basic looping advice is to use vaults before dropping a single pallet. If you drop a pallet and the killer kicks it, it's gone for the rest of the game. Advanced players will be able to tell which pallets to save and which to drop instantly, but that requires learning every single variant of every single tile in the game. I'm 500 hours deep into this game and I don't know any of that shit. For people at my skill level and below, here's the basic idea. When you see the killer coming, run towards the nearest tile with tall walls. As you are running, look behind you and see how close the killer is. When running around a tile, as long as you are in chase, the killer will be building bloodlust and slowly gaining speed boosts. If they commit to following you in circles around one object, they will catch up quickly, so when they start to get close, you need to confuse them or find a window to vault or a pallet to stun them with. It's important to remember that the goal of looping is to waste the killer's time so your team can work on gens. It doesn't matter if you're playing well or running around like an idiot. As long as you keep wasting the killer's time, you're doing great. It's also important to look behind you frequently. Looping in DBD is like driving a car. You need to check your blind spots every few seconds. If the killer is close, run around the walls until you see an opportunity to vault, and then try to find a different window or pallet to loop. If the killer is far away, try to run to a further window or pallet. To survive in chase, you need to loop every window or pallet at least once before vaulting or dropping the pallet. Additionally, good chases are when you connect multiple tiles in one chase and take the killer between them multiple times. Before you drop a pallet, it's also important to not zone yourself on the edge of the map. Zoning is when the killer forces you away from strong tiles and towards the edge of the map with fewer resources. When you drop a pallet, it's important that you drop it so the killer is on the side of the pallet closer to the edge of the map, and you are on the side with more resources. If you're healthy and there's a window you can vault, don't drop the pallet. If you're injured and there isn't a window to vault, you can drop the pallet. Dropping pallets is better than getting hooked, but if you notice the killer is waiting for you to drop pallets so they can kick them, don't drop too many and just take a hit and try and make distance to find a window to play around instead. You don't want the killer to be able to break all the pallets around a 3-gen because it makes their endgame that much easier, and if you manage to stay alive and chase long enough for your teammates to complete a generator, going down is better than wasting good pallets. When dropping a pallet, if you can get a stun, go for it. However, certain killers have powers that make stunning them very difficult. In these instances, or when playing a pallet in the middle of nowhere, pre-dropping the pallet is a good idea. Again, just be careful not to drop too many pallets too quickly. Now, again, I'm not going to cover every single tile in the game, but I am going to explain how to play shack. Almost every map has a shack, so it's one of the easiest tiles to find in a pinch. It also has one of the strongest pallets in the game, so learning how to waste time without dropping the pallet is key. The basics of running shack are using check spots and faking while running around the outside of the shack. Check spots are places where you can stand on a tile to see the killer, normally on corners so you can see both ways around a wall. When you are on the corner of the shack, you can see the killer coming before they see you. Therefore, you can tell which direction the killer is coming from, so you can run the opposite direction. If you let go of the sprint button at these check spots, you can break chase with the killer mid-loop, preventing the entity from blocking the window. If done correctly, shack window can become an infinite because the killer isn't building bloodlust and the window will never block. Once you've vaulted the window in shack, it's time to fake. Faking is just convincing the killer you're going one direction and then changing your mind at the last minute. If the killer doesn't vault the window after you, this is accomplished by running one direction and then doubling back as soon as the killer starts to follow you. If they notice and double back as well, just double back again. If the killer does vault after you, just keep moving and go vault the window again. Since there's a wall with a window in it, the killer can't hit you and you can see which direction they're going. Of course, this assumes the killer doesn't have a range attack, but I'll get into that next. With a combination of check spots and fakes, you should be able to buy 30 seconds to a minute at shack quite easily. As soon as the pallet has been dropped or the killer has injured you, you can use Lithe to vault the window and go to the next tile. If the pallet has been dropped in shack, it is not safe and you should leave ASAP. Before I move on from looping, I want to talk about a few unique strategies that can help in certain scenarios. First is the crouch tech. When playing against killers like the Blight and the Hillbilly who use dash attacks, you can sometimes crouch to avoid the hit. Crouching makes your hitbox smaller, and particularly while going down a slope like a staircase, you can make your hitbox so small the killer can't hit you. This is really only strong when facing killers like these and going down long staircases, but it's a technique that can save your life in a pinch. The second technique is even more situational, but can also save your life in certain scenarios. When a killer puts you into the dying state, you can emote and skip the falling animation to start crawling immediately. If you want to die on a pallet so a teammate can try and save you, right as the killer is about to hit you, use the beckon emote so you can start moving before the animation is over and guarantee that you're under the pallet by the time the killer wipes their weapon. You can also use this technique at the exit gate to crawl further and maybe prevent the killer from picking you up or setting your teammate up for a heal tech. As a final note on chases, if you know the killer is about to down you, it's better to die away from walls than in the middle of a structure. If you die near a wall, it can be difficult for teammates to try and save you. Dying on a pallet can also be a good idea, but making sure the killer hooks you as far away from generators as possible is a consistently good strategy. When you can't stall the killer any longer, the final way to waste their time is to force them to hook you in a far corner of the map. This puts the killer in a lose-lose scenario, where they either guard your hook and let everyone else complete generators and escape, or they go try to find other survivors to chase and allow your teammates to save you. This strategy is not a great idea against movement killers like the ghoul, but that requires understanding how to play against each killer. When looping a killer, one of the most important things to determine is what type of killer they are. Memorizing every killer power and terror radius music is the best way to do this, but as a quick categorization, these are the basic types of killers. First are M1 killers, so-called because they rely on their primary attack to down survivors. Common M1 killers are Wraith, Trapper, and Ghostface. These killers all tend to move at the same speed and have the same range for lunge attacks, so as you play against them, you can start to learn what the default movement speed and range is to know how to safely avoid hits. While looping against these killers, you essentially don't have to worry about their power at all. If they try to use their power mid-chase, you often gain more distance. The Ghostface is the most likely to successfully use his power mid-chase, but that's because he falls under the subcategories of stealth and insta-down, just like the Shape. Stealth or insta-down killers are slightly harder to predict, mostly by design, but they also don't fundamentally change gameplay much, so for the purposes of this list, I still consider them M1 killers. Additionally, I will not be discussing trap killers like Trapper or Hag in their own category, as they simply don't have powers if you avoid their traps, so they're M1 too. The second category are ranged killers, who, rather obviously, use ranged attacks. Some examples are Huntress, Deathslinger, Trickster, and Artist. While the Artist is slightly more complex, her main power centers around hitting survivors with ranged attacks, just like the others. While slightly more complicated than M1 killers, their powers can largely be avoided by avoiding open areas. If you hug walls and try to juke them into wasting ammo, they're not very hard to play against. A general note for all ranged killers, and to a lesser extent the remaining categories, is how reliant killers are on predicting survivors. For example, if you're facing a Deathslinger and running in straight lines, he'll hit you almost every time. However, if you wait for him to aim and then quickly move left or right, you can often avoid his attacks and force him to reload. Just remember to mix up your jukes from time to time. If you successfully dodge 2 of the Huntress's hatchets by dodging left, next time dodge right. Being unpredictable is a key skill for surviving against all killers. The third category is a bit bloated, but it is a vast majority of killer powers. This is simply anti-loop killers. Depending on definition, this includes Dark Lord, Cenobite, Doctor, Plague, Nightmare, Xenomorph, Mastermind, Nemesis, and frankly the list goes on. The reason this category is so bloated is most killers have some ability to counter survivors on loops. A true anti-loop killer punishes survivors for staying at pallets instead of making distance, and has an ability that can hit through walls or guarantee a hit from the other side of an obstacle. The perfect examples in my mind are Doctor and Dark Lord. The Doctor can shock survivors from the opposite side of a wall, preventing them from vaulting and guaranteeing hits. There is no obstacle that prevents him from using his ability. While most of his abilities can also be used for information gathering, this core anti-loop philosophy is the key to his strength. Similarly, all of the Dark Lord's abilities can be used to prevent the survivors from gaining safety or escaping different loops. However, his bat form is primarily designed for mobility, and his wolf form is strongest when chasing survivors in open areas. His fire attack is the perfect example of anti-loop, as it's the same core idea as the Executioner's ability, allowing the killer to hit a survivor behind a wall. While the Executioner's ability has a longer range and works without needing line of sight on the survivor, a good Dark Lord can use all three forms in the middle of a chase to remove options for the survivors. To play against a really good anti-loop killer is simply to take a hit eventually. Delaying that hit by being hard to predict or using exhaustion perks to gain distance is your best strategy. Against certain killers like the Doctor, gain distance is easy and the survivor can largely avoid hits if playing well. Against a good Cenobite or a Mastermind, however, being injured is an eventuality you're simply trying to delay. The fourth category is much simpler, as it's simply mobility. Mobility killers might be able to use their ability to down survivors, but its primary use is for traversing the map quickly. Three perfect examples are Blight, Ghoul, and Dredge. While good players use all of their abilities as anti-loop, the real strength of these characters is their ability to get from one side of the map to the other in just a few seconds. This means distance is irrelevant when looping these killers. You can play perfectly and loop them for ages on one tile, but as soon as they force you away from that tile, you're a free hit. The Ghoul is probably the strongest example of this, as his ability can lock onto survivors he can see, guaranteeing hits. The Dredge, on the other hand, is strongest when in 50-50 scenarios at unsafe pallets. If you can put walls between you and him, he's much less of a threat, but his teleport allows him to quickly reposition even mid-chase. Mobility killers are tough, and safety can be hard to find, but as a general rule, their abilities aren't designed for elevation or indoor spaces, so any double-story building is relatively safe. Before I discuss the final category, I will take a second to discuss other common themes amongst killers, mainly map changes and managing health states. Plenty of killers have abilities that affect the map and create secondary objectives for survivors, and plenty more have abilities that can force survivors to be injured or cause them to lose multiple health states at once. A perfect killer to use while discussing these topics is the Plague. Her power at its base form can infect survivors and objects around the map. Survivors who do not cleanse their infection become injured and broken, and they need to be cautious when interacting with objectives, as their infection can spread to objects as well. This can put a survivor in a scenario where they must choose between progressing an infected generator or remaining healthy and not working on an objective. Or, vice versa, a survivor who is infected must decide whether they should be the one to work on a generator or unhook a teammate, or whether they should go cleanse their infection first. The trouble is, by cleansing their infection, the Plague can unlock her next ability, which allows her to injure survivors directly rather than simply infecting them. In this state, most survivors don't stand a chance against her, and yet, she's not considered to be very strong by the community. This is because while the Plague's abilities ask survivors to make tough choices, those choices disappear if survivors are willing to play the entire game injured. In fact, by playing injured, the survivors prevent her from ever really using her power. This strategy also applies to mending killers like the Legion, or insta-down killers like the Cannibal. If survivors are good enough to simply avoid being hit, it doesn't matter if they're playing the game with one less health state, and the killer might as well use their primary attack, as their ability only wastes their own time. Get good isn't exactly useful advice, but it is important to remember that survivors don't need to be healthy to complete objectives and escape. In every game, you can assume you will be injured for some period of time, so bringing perks or items that help while injured is always a good idea. The final category is simply game-breaking, and there's one queen who has never been dethroned, the Nurse. Her ability allows her to teleport through walls, rendering all pallets and structures useless. She can injure survivors immediately after teleporting, and she can use her teleport for mobility. The Nurse's Blink ability transcends my categories, as it is a ranged attack with anti-loop and mobility all rolled into one input. To clarify, unlike most of this community, I don't think that's a bad thing. It's a crown she earned by being the most complicated killer to master and one of the most challenging and fun to verse. I do agree that something needs to change, but rather than nerfing her into the ground and ruining her, I'd rather see more killers and survivors with strong game-changing abilities. With the recent additions of the Ghoul and the animatronic, I think the devs agree that diversifying the killer roster with strong killers is better for keeping the game fun. However, while the Ghoul and the animatronic are both strong, they don't quite measure up to the Nurse. There's also an argument to discuss killers like the Singularity or the Twins in this category, and while each of those killers requires the survivors to specifically be aware of the mechanics of their powers and the individual counters, neither quite break the game to that same level. For the purpose of this video, here are the basic counters survivors need to know. To temporarily disable the Singularity's cameras or remove his mark from a survivor, you need to use one of the EMPs found in special chests around the map. When the pig places a head trap on a survivor, they must remove the trap before going through an exit gate, otherwise the trap will explode. But survivors can still escape through the hatch even with an active head trap. Finally, and maybe most importantly, because it seems to confuse my teammates the most, the Nightmare can teleport to survivors who are healing while asleep. Before healing teammates, make sure to wake each other up to prevent this. Now that you know how to loop and counter the killer, you might find yourself in the situation of being better than your teammates. A major part of solo queue DBD is keeping your team alive. Obviously, healing and unhooking them is important, but there are more things to consider. First, it's not always a good idea to unhook a survivor quickly. It takes 60 seconds for someone on hook to progress to the next hook stage, so you have time to wait for the best moment to unhook. By unhooking immediately, the killer can just turn around and tunnel the person you just unhooked. It's generally a good idea to leave a teammate on hook for at least 10 seconds, but it's also important to unhook them before the killer injures another survivor. This is probably the part of the game I struggle with the most, as when I play killer, I refuse to tunnel a player off hook, so I never expect a killer to do it. If you notice a killer camping right in front of the hook, don't go for the save so your teammate can build up anti-camp while on the hook and unhook themselves. It sucks, but the only counter to face camping killers is doing gens and letting that survivor fend for themselves. If you notice a killer proxy camping, or monitoring the hook from far enough away that the anti-camp doesn't activate, wait until your teammate is just about to go to second stage, like 45 seconds or so, and then run in and unhook them. It is better for 2 survivors to have 1 hook stage than for 1 survivor to have 2. Even if it means dying and trading places with your teammate, getting them off the hook before second stage is essential. Now, let's say your teammate unhooks the survivor early and the killer chooses to tunnel them and get them to second stage. If you have no hook stages and your teammate has 2, it is now your job to play aggressively and to go down for your teammate. If you have the perk Shoulder the Burden, you can transfer a hook stage from a teammate to yourself, slowing down the killer's ability to tunnel. In situations against a hard tunneling killer, this is the best solution. Without it, sometimes you will be forced to let a teammate die so the rest of you can escape. If the killer isn't hard tunneling, but happens to find a survivor on second stage while you haven't been hooked, it's now your job to run straight at the killer and take hits for your teammate. If you put yourself in a doorway or between obstacles, you can use your hitbox to block the killer from chasing your teammate. You can also do this in front of a hook to prevent the killer from hooking. If you do this successfully, your teammate should be able to make distance, and if you can distract the killer, they might lose track of the survivor they were chasing, forcing them to chase you instead. Once you notice the killer chasing you instead of your teammate, you can start looping normally and wasting their time. Additionally, you can save a teammate by getting a flashlight save or pallet save. By blinding or stunning the killer just as they pick up a survivor, the killer will drop the survivor, allowing them to make distance while the killer is stunned. This is by far the most consistent way to save a teammate, but requires lots of practice. To blind a killer with a flashlight, you need to point the beam at the killer's head until the blind noise is played and Killer Blind appears in the top right. You can blind a killer multiple times in a row, but for the purpose of a flashlight save, that's not really necessary. Both flashlight saves and pallet saves require blinding or stunning the killer at specific points in the pickup animation. For a flashlight save, you need to start blinding the killer when the survivor is at their waistline for normal height killers. The timing changes slightly for killers with unique animations like the animatronic, and the positioning changes for killers of different heights. To get a pallet save, you need to wait until the animation finishes and the killer has fully picked up the survivor. However, if you wait too long and the killer can swing their weapon, they can move out of the hitbox of the pallet before the stun registers. Hypothetically, this makes flashlight saves more consistent, but the killer can easily avoid them by facing a wall when picking up a survivor. However, they can only avoid a pallet save by leaving that survivor slugged or hoping the survivors mess up the timing. While I can barely get either of these saves, they are important to be aware of to position yourself accordingly so teammates can get these saves even if you can't. If you notice your teammates have flashlights, it's safe to assume they want to go for flashlight saves, so going down away from walls is smart. One final altruistic play that every survivor should know is a heal tech. Heal teching a survivor is very simple, but requires both survivors to understand the timing. Essentially, the killer cannot pick up a survivor in the dying state if another survivor is healing them. This is most useful in the exit gate when your teammate only needs to crawl a few feet to escape, but it can be done anytime you want to prevent the killer from picking up a teammate. To succeed at a heal tech, the survivor in the dying state cannot move, and the survivor healing them must hold the sprint button while healing so that they cannot be healed. As a general note, if you hold the sprint button, it prevents other survivors from healing you. Now that you understand the mechanics of a heal tech, here's the timing. When the killer hits a survivor and puts them into the dying state, a weapon wipe animation plays, preventing the killer from doing anything for a second or two. While this animation plays, the survivor on the ground must crawl towards the exit. As soon as the killer finishes wiping their weapon, the second survivor needs to start healing their teammate on the ground while holding the sprint button. The killer will be forced to hit the second survivor, playing the weapon wipe animation again. If the second survivor was healthy, simply repeat the steps above until both survivors are in the dying state and can crawl out the exit. If there are multiple survivors heal teching their teammate, repeat the steps above until all survivors crawl out the exit. While this is a very complicated technique to accomplish, once you've done it a few times, the timing is easier and you can consistently use it to save teammates at the exit. With all of this information, you should be able to make it to the endgame more frequently. While I stand by everything I said in the beginner's guide, there are a few tips for the endgame I feel are worth covering in more depth. First, I will repeat that you should not 99 exit gates without a clear reason. The only two scenarios where you shouldn't open an exit gate as soon as you can are as follows. First, if the killer is carrying a survivor and about to hook them, you should wait until the survivor is on the hook before opening the exit. This is to counter one perk I rarely see in games called Blood Warden. This perk blocks the exit after a survivor has been hooked in the endgame and reveals any survivor's auras who are in the exit gate. Blood Warden can only be activated after an exit gate has been opened, and it can only block the exit once per trial. By waiting to finish opening the exit until after a survivor has been hooked, you can completely counter this perk. The second scenario where you should 99 an exit is if two or more survivors are injured at the exit and you want to go back to save a teammate on hook. This presumes the killer is far enough away for the survivors to fully reset safely and that the survivors want to go save their teammate. Even if all of the above is true, as soon as the survivors go in for a save, they should open the exit. Certain killers can use their power to prevent survivors from opening exits, so not wasting that second or two at the door can be the difference between life and death. Another very important thing to be mindful of during the endgame is NOED. This perk, Hex, No One Escapes Death, allows the killer to insta-down survivors with a basic attack after the last gen has been completed. When the killer hits someone and this perk is activated, the words Hex, No One Escapes Death will appear in the top right. Like all Hex perks, the survivors can cleanse it to prevent the killer from using it. Unlike other Hex perks though, NOED only appears in the endgame, so survivors have to react quickly. Once the Hex totem is active, survivors will see its aura within 24 meters after 30 seconds, so whichever survivor isn't in danger should start hunting for NOED. If the survivors can cleanse NOED quickly, everyone can escape. If they can't cleanse it quickly, the killer can turn what would have been 4 escapes into 4 kills, so this is the perk survivors should be most wary of. This perk is also the poster child of the motto, if it glows, it goes. If a survivor finds a Hex totem, in other words, a glowing totem, they should cleanse it and get rid of it before the killer can use the associated Hex perk against their team. While there are certain Hex perks that punish survivors for cleansing, and certain survivor perks that require interacting with dull totems, a good rule of thumb as survivor is to cleanse any glowing totem as soon as possible, and ignore any dull totem. I don't think it's worth explaining every Hex perk in this video, but certain perks like Hex Devour Hope can single-handedly win the game for the killer if it isn't cleansed. Familiarizing yourself with the perks killers often bring, and how to spot them during a game, is a good habit to develop, and as you continue to play, you will quickly learn which perks to fear and how to counter them. And with that, my intermediate survivor guide comes to a close. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. It really helps me out. If there are any other tutorials you want me to make, please leave a comment and I'll make a video as soon as I can. Until the next video, I'll see you all in the fog.